With all of that swirling in the background, DA Brat's reaction didn't feel small. It felt huge. It felt like confirmation that the whispers people were afraid to say out loud was suddenly being echoed, even unintentionally, by someone close to the situation. And that's when people started saying the sentence that shouldn't even exist. What if the woman everyone thinks is Ashley's aunt is actually her mother? And as ridiculous as that might sound to outsiders, to anyone listening closely to Ashley's words over the years, it didn't sound ridiculous at all. It sounded like the truth she had been circling her entire life, a truth she could feel but couldn't name. And the more she talked, the more she admitted how confused she had been growing up, how timelines didn't add up, how explanations changed depending on who she asked, how she always felt like she was being kept in the dark. Every piece of her story pointed to a childhood built around gaps that only make sense if someone was hiding something big. DA Brat didn't expose the secret. She didn't say the words, but her reaction opened the door. And once that door opened, the internet walked right through it. Because now the big question isn't, is this possible? It's, if this is true, how long has the family been hiding it? Once that door opened, it felt like Ashley was standing in the middle of a room filled with pieces of a puzzle she never knew belonged to her. And suddenly, every memory she had ever questioned began to feel heavier, sharper, more revealing than before. Because now, the things she used to brush off as childhood confusion was starting to look like signs. Signs of a story she wasn't given. Signs of truths she wasn't allowed to understand. Signs that the people closest to her may have been protecting something much bigger than she ever realized. She talked about how, growing up, the family dynamic always felt strange. She didn't say it in an angry way, not like someone who wanted revenge. She said it like someone who had spent her entire life trying to fit into a picture that kept shifting whenever she tried to focus. She described a home where the atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was layered, full of unsaid things, full of invisible lines you weren't allowed to cross. She said there were moments she still can't explain, moments where she felt like certain conversations ended too quickly, certain questions were brushed away with a smile that didn't reach anyone's eyes. And that's the part people kept replaying. Because children feel truth even when adults refuse to say it. Kids sense when something is off, even if they don't have the vocabulary to describe it. And Ashley's childhood sounded like a maze built by adults who needed her to walk in circles without ever finding the exit. The more she spoke, the more people realized how much of her story was shaped by silence. Not just neglect, not just confusion. Silence, intentional silence. The kind where a child only hears as much as the adults want her to hear, only knows as much as the adults allow her to know. And when she grew older and began questioning the things that didn't make sense, she was met with a different kind of silence, a firmer one, the kind that warns you not to ask again. But the strangest part of all was when she talked about the brothers, not the ones the world knows about, not the ones tied to the Braxton name in public. She mentioned two half-brothers, casually, like she was mentioning something normal, even though the meaning behind that word was anything but normal. Half-brothers, children connected to her through one parent, children who existed outside the main story, outside the family's public face. Children she didn't even know about until she was older. The moment she said that, the internet froze. Because hidden siblings never appear in families without reason. Hidden siblings usually point to hidden relationships, hidden timelines, hidden decisions made by adults who don't want certain truths to reach daylight. And when you place that detail next to the birth certificate confusion, the resemblance conversations, and her growing up experience, it doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like deliberate omission. It feels like someone erased entire parts of her story so she wouldn't discover everything too soon. And then there was the part that made people's hearts break. The birth certificate. Not just the missing name, not just the added name, but the way Ashley described learning about it. She didn't learn it as an adult doing research. She learned it as a child being told a story that made no sense. A story that no legal expert would ever approve. A story that only exists when someone is desperate to create a version of reality that fits whatever truth they want to hide. And that's when fans truly began to take the theory seriously. Because birth certificates don't get changed the way she was told they did. They don't get rewritten like school assignments. They don't get adjusted because someone wants a cleaner story. Removing a mother's name, adding a stepmother's name. Those aren't things you hear about in normal families. Those are things that happen when someone needs paperwork to match the narrative they want to sell. And Ashley's confusion wasn't just emotional, it was administrative, legal, structural. It was a kind of confusion that comes from adults manipulating documents behind the scenes while hoping the child never asks questions. And then, as if that wasn't enough, people remembered her describing how long she had been sharing her story online. Years. Not a few months. Not a small moment. Years. She had been posting videos about her pain, her trauma, her confusion, and somehow, almost nobody ever saw them. They barely reached anyone. They stayed buried, invisible, lost in the algorithm in a way that didn't match her connection to a famous family at all. And that's when the word everyone was afraid to say finally entered the conversation: shadow band. Because how does someone connected to one of the most well-known music families in America upload videos for years that nobody ever sees? How does her content stay buried when thousands of fans should have been clicking on it? How does a woman telling a story this explosive stay hidden in plain sight while the family lives publicly, loudly, openly on reality TV? The answer is simple: she wasn't supposed to be heard. And that silence feels different when you connect it to the theory about Towanda. Because if Towanda really was a biological mother, if the truth needed to stay buried to protect reputations, marriages, careers, timelines, or public image, then keeping Ashley's voice quiet would have been a priority. Not an accident, not a coincidence, a priority. And you could feel that weight in Ashley's voice, especially when she talked about her father. She never said certain things directly. She never accused him with blunt words. But the way she described his reaction to her speaking publicly made people feel cold. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just disappointment. She hinted at fear, panic, urgency, the kind of tension that only exists when someone believes the truth could destroy everything they've built. And fans picked up on it immediately. They began saying that maybe the reason Ashley softened her tone wasn't because she healed, but because she felt cornered. Maybe someone reached out. Maybe someone reminded her that speaking too loudly could cause repercussions she wasn't ready to face. Maybe someone convinced her that reframing her experience was better for everyone involved. And that's when DA Brat's involvement turned from a simple reaction into something far bigger. Because instead of shutting the conversation down, DA Brat's tone made people feel like that door was trembling. And maybe that's why Ashley softened her tone. Not because she wanted to, not because she suddenly doubted herself, not because she changed her mind, but because the truth standing behind that door is bigger, heavier, and messier than she ever imagined. And she isn't just protecting herself anymore. She might be protecting the woman who could be her real mother. And that brings us to the question the internet can't let go of. If Towanda truly is Ashley's biological mother, then who has been protecting this secret? And who has been forcing her to stay quiet? As the theory grew louder, it stopped feeling like something born from curiosity and started feeling like something born from patterns that were too clean, too consistent, too aligned to be dismissed. Because every time people thought they had reached the end of the mystery, another piece of Ashley's life surfaced and fit perfectly into the same direction, toward a truth she had never been allowed to own. And with each puzzle piece, the idea that Towanda might be her real mother stopped feeling wild and started feeling possible, maybe even probable. But the part that made everything even more intense was the timing. Ashley had been telling her story for years, quietly, almost invisibly. She wasn't getting views. She wasn't going viral. She wasn't being heard. She was like a voice shouting into an empty room. And then suddenly, after DA Brat reacted, after the internet picked up the story, after people started noticing the resemblance and questioning the timeline, her voice finally rose above the silence, only for her to immediately soften it. And nobody missed that. People began asking, why would Ashley start walking back her own truth now? Why would someone who spoke with so much conviction for so long suddenly act like she might have exaggerated? Why did she suddenly try to make her childhood sound gentler, lighter, less alarming? The answer that fans kept returning to was simple and painful. Because someone got to her. Someone told her the story had gone too far. Someone told her the internet was digging too deep. Someone told her that questions were being asked that had never been asked before. Someone told her that the truth she was circling was bigger than she realized. Someone told her to slow down, or else. And when people began looking at the patterns in her family, that someone started to look less like a mystery and more like a person she had spent her whole life trying to understand. Because Michael Braxton wasn't just the father in the rumor. He was the one whose actions, according to Ashley, always carried the most fear. He was the one she talked about with hesitations and long pauses. He was the one whose reaction seemed to weigh on her decisions. He was the one whose disapproval felt dangerous, not emotional. And the more people compared her tone when she talked about him to her tone when she talked about the rest of the family, the more it felt like he had been the gatekeeper to the truth her entire life. And if the theory is true, if Ashley is actually Towanda's biological child, then Michael is the person who would have benefited the most from silence. The person with the most to hide. The person with the most to lose. Because think about what that would mean. If Towanda had a child young, out of wedlock, or during a complicated time, if the family feared public backlash, if careers were at stake, if marriages were threatened, if reputations were fragile, if the timing didn't match the public story the family wanted to present, then hiding the truth wouldn't be just an option, it would be a strategy. And what's the easiest way to hide a child's true identity? You don't announce anything. You don't explain anything. You don't let the public ask questions. You simply raise the child under someone else's name. You adjust your paperwork. You keep the circles small. You build a narrative that keeps people from knowing what really happened. And when that child starts growing up and noticing things, you do what families with secrets always do. You silence, you deny, you redirect, you avoid. And that's why fans keep coming back to the same idea. Maybe Towanda wasn't the distant aunt figure she appeared to be. Maybe she was the mother forced into silence. Maybe she was the one who lived with the guilt of watching her child grow up under someone else's identity. Maybe she was the one who had to pretend. Maybe she was the one who suffered quietly because the truth didn't belong to her. It belonged to whoever was controlling the narrative. And when you look at Ashley's story through that lens, everything starts making an uncomfortable kind of sense. The confusion, the hidden brothers, the birth certificate changes, the inconsistencies, the suppressed videos, the sudden shift in tone, the emotional distance, the random fragments of memory, the fear in her voice when she mentions certain family members, the softness when she mentions others. All of it fits, too perfectly. And the scariest part of all is this: Ashley herself might not even know the full truth. She might only have pieces, fragments, whispers she wasn't supposed to hear, memories that don't line up because they were never meant to line up. And now that the public has started uncovering the pattern, she might be caught between the truth she wants and the fear that has been planted in her since childhood. And that's when the reason behind her sudden softening becomes clearer. She wasn't walking back her story because she believed she was wrong. She was walking it back because the truth was finally close enough to touch, close enough to expose, close enough to shatter everything. And she wasn't ready for the fallout. Maybe she was protecting herself. Maybe she was protecting her real mother. Maybe she was protecting the woman she thinks is her mother. Maybe she was protecting everyone at once. And then fans started asking a darker, more painful question. What if the reason Ashley softened her story wasn't because someone pressured her, but because someone scared her? The idea lingered in every comment section. The silence that followed each new detail felt heavy. People weren't just curious anymore, they were worried. They could hear the fear in her voice. They could feel the tension in her pauses. They could see the way she hesitated when her story came too close to naming the truth out loud. And yet, despite all of it, one fact remained impossible to ignore. The theory only grew stronger the more she spoke. Her silence didn't weaken it. Her softness didn't erase it. Her hesitation didn't kill it. If anything, they made it louder, because real truths have a way of revealing themselves even when the person speaking is too afraid to say them directly. And that's where the internet has landed, not in a place of drama, not in a place of conspiracy, but in a place of possibility. A place where the clues point more toward truth than rumor. A place where Ashley's entire life story feels like a map leading to a secret that could change everything. A place where people are asking the same question in 100 different ways. If Towanda really is Ashley's mother, what would happen if Ashley finally said it out loud? Would the family deny it? Would they panic? Would they silence her again? Or would the truth finally break free? And as Ashley sits in the middle of all this, older, braver, more aware than she has ever been, you can almost feel her standing on the edge of a truth she has carried unknowingly her entire life. A truth her face already knows. A truth her heart already suspects. A truth her childhood already recorded. A truth the internet has now uncovered. And a truth she might one day be ready to speak. And now that all the pieces are on the table, there's only one thing left to ask. What happens if Ashley finally speaks the truth she's been circling her entire life? Not the softened version, not the careful version, not the version shaped by fear, but the real one. The one she's never been allowed to say out loud. Because if even half of what the internet has uncovered is true, then this isn't just a rumor. It's a lifetime of secrets pushing their way to the surface. And once a story like that starts cracking open, it almost never closes again. So tell me what you think. Do you believe the resemblance, the hidden brothers, the birth certificate changes, the sudden shift in her tone, and DA Brat's reaction all point to the same truth? Or do you think this is all one giant misunderstanding that spiraled out of control? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I read every single one. Your voice keeps these stories alive, and your perspective might be the one that connects the final piece of this mystery. And if you want the full breakdown of whatever happens next, every update, every twist, every leak, every detail the family tries to keep quiet, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Turn on the bell so you don't miss a single chapter, because trust me, this story is nowhere near over. I'll see you in the next deep dive. DA Brat didn't just speak, she detonated something. Because the moment she reacted to Ashley Braxton's story, the entire internet started looking at one person with new eyes. Not the father, not the stepmother, not the listed biological mom. No, they looked straight at Towanda. And suddenly, the question nobody ever imagined saying out loud became the loudest question online. What if Ashley isn't who the family told her she was? What if the real mother is someone the world already knows? And the craziest part? The DNA rumors didn't start because someone made something up. They started because Ashley's own words, her own timeline, and her own memories line up too perfectly with a truth the family never wanted exposed. When DA Brat spoke, she didn't even realize she was about to light a match that would set the entire Braxton family conversation on fire. She was responding casually, honestly, just reacting to Ashley's years of talking about her childhood, but the internet heard something different. They heard a shift. They heard confirmation. They heard a tone that didn't sound dismissive or confused. It sounded like someone who had just connected that she wasn't supposed to connect. And the moment that clip went viral, people started looking at Ashley's story through a whole different lens. Because this wasn't some random fan rumor anymore. This wasn't just another messy internet theory. This was coming right after Ashley had spent years telling the same painful, detailed story about her childhood. The same timeline, the same trauma, the same emotional scars, over and over, never changing a single beat. She wasn't inconsistent. She wasn't confused. She wasn't switching narratives depending on who was listening. She held onto her truth the way someone holds onto a memory they can't escape. And then suddenly, a twist. Something changed. A softness entered her voice. She started downplaying the exact same story she had repeated for years. And the timing of it all didn't feel random. Because right as Ashley shifted her tone, right as people were questioning her sudden it wasn't that bad energy, DA Brat stepped into the conversation and unintentionally validated everything the internet had been whispering about. And that's when the focus moved, sharply, unexpectedly, onto Towanda. At first, it was subtle. People started comparing pictures without saying anything out loud. They pulled up Ashley's photos, then pulled up Towanda's. Side by side, frame by frame. They weren't trying to stir anything. They were trying to understand. But the more they looked, the more uncomfortable the similarities became. The same jawline, the same bone structure, the same eyes, the same expressions. Details that don't lie, details that don't soften, details that DNA doesn't apologize for. And suddenly the internet was buzzing with the same sentence. Why does Ashley look more like Towanda than anyone else in that family? And once that seed was planted, it grew fast. People weren't just looking at the physical resemblance anymore. They were revisiting Ashley's entire story, digging through the details she had shared over the years, details most people ignored until now. They remembered how she said her childhood felt confusing, how some things never made sense, how she always felt like she was on the outside of the family she grew up in. They remembered how she mentioned that something felt off even when she was small, that she never fully understood her place inside the household. And when they looked closer, all the pieces started lining up. They remembered the birth certificate story, the missing name, the strange modifications, the explanation she was given as a child that never made any legal sense. They remembered the half-brothers she mentioned, the siblings she didn't even know existed until much later, the shifting timelines, the stories that felt rehearsed or filtered through someone else's voice. And the more they compared everything Ashley said with everything the family showed publicly, the more it felt like her entire childhood had been shaped around a truth she wasn't supposed to know. But the real spark? The moment fans went from confused to convinced? It was the way D.A. Brat reacted when Ashley talked about the years she spent telling her story. D.A. Brat wasn't laughing. She wasn't brushing it off. She wasn't acting like Ashley was making something out of nothing. She sounded concerned, surprised, almost like she had stumbled into something she didn't expect to hear, something that made too much sense to ignore. And that was enough for people to start digging deeper. Because D.A. Brat has known the Braxton family for years. She's been around them, seen their dynamics, watched things play out behind the scenes in ways the public never gets to. So when someone with that kind of access reacts in a way that signals this feels off, people notice. People pay attention. Fans started saying, if D.A. Brat sounds like she believes something is going on, then something probably is going on. And that's when the theory took on a life of its own. Because if Ashley looked more like Towanda, if her childhood was full of suppressed details, if her birth certificate didn't make sense, if she had hidden brothers, if she felt displaced her whole life, and if someone seemed desperate to keep her quiet, then maybe it wasn't just a theory. Maybe it was a truth hidden so deep that even Ashley hadn't been allowed to understand it fully. Maybe the person she spent her whole life thinking was her mother wasn't. Maybe the woman she always saw as just another Braxton sister actually held the truth about who brought her into the world. And once fans allowed themselves to even consider that possibility, everything about Ashley's life snapped into a sharper clarity, like the truth had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for someone to notice. People started revisiting interviews, old episodes, family videos, red carpet appearances, anything that showed the family dynamic. And they realized something they had never seen before. Towanda always treated Ashley differently. Not badly, not harshly, but differently, almost like a mixture of guilt and distance, almost like someone who was trying to love without revealing too much. And then they looked at Michael, Ashley's father, and noticed how the tension between them didn't look like normal father-daughter strain. It looked heavier. It looked like someone who held a secret that terrified him. Someone who couldn't risk certain conversations happening. Someone who needed her quiet. And now, with all of that swirling in the background, D.A. Brat's reaction didn't feel small. It felt huge. It felt like confirmation that the whispers people were afraid to say out loud was suddenly being echoed, even unintentionally, by someone close to the situation. And that's when people started saying the sentence that shouldn't even exist. What if the woman everyone thinks is Ashley's aunt is actually her mother? And as ridiculous as that might sound to outsiders, to anyone listening closely to Ashley's words over the years, it didn't sound ridiculous at all. It sounded like the truth she had been circling her entire life, a truth she could feel but couldn't name. And the more she talked, the more she admitted how confused she had been growing up, how timelines didn't add up, how explanations changed depending on who she asked, how she always felt like she was being kept in the dark. Every piece of her story pointed to a childhood built around gaps that only make sense if someone was hiding something big. D.A. Brat didn't expose the secret. She didn't say the words, but her reaction opened the door. And once that door opened, the internet walked right through it. Because now the big question isn't, is this possible? It's if this is true, how long has the family been hiding it? Once that door opened, it felt like Ashley was standing in the middle of a room filled with pieces of a puzzle she never knew belonged to her. And suddenly, every memory she had ever questioned began to feel heavier, sharper, more revealing than before. Because now, the things she used to brush off as childhood confusion were starting to look like signs. Signs of a story she wasn't given. Signs of truths she wasn't allowed to understand. Signs that the people closest to her may have been protecting something much bigger than she ever realized. She talked about how, growing up, the family dynamic always felt strained. She didn't say it in an angry way, not like someone who wanted revenge. She said it like someone who had spent her entire life trying to fit into a picture that kept shifting whenever she tried to focus. She described a home where the atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was layered, full of unsaid things, full of invisible lines you weren't allowed to cross. She said there were moments she still can't explain, moments where she felt